Hi, welcome to the How Not to Think podcast. I'm Dr. Howard Rankin, and today we have a great guest, Garret Biss, who is a mindset recovery coach, which means that he works in the addictions field. He is an award-winning author on a book about happiness and on charity, and he's got a lot of valuable information and insight in how to manage the whole concept of addiction and recovery. So without further ado, welcome, Garret.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you for having me.
Great. Been looking forward to this conversation for some time. So just to kick it off here, allow our listeners get to know a little bit about you. Let's hear your background and your story before we get into the discussion of mindset and recovery.
Certainly. Well, Howard, I didn't know this was going to get personal.
Well, of course.
So I spent 17 years in the Marine Corps as a pilot in the Marine Corps, retired in 2015. I had a huge passion for learning about things that could positively influence my life. A couple of years prior to transitioning out of the Marine Corps, went through a really rough chapter of my life, and there was some insight and some wisdom and knowledge and great mentorship that helped me really transform my life. And experience things in a much better way. I felt much more empowered, had a much greater sense of meaning and purpose. And when I transitioned out of the military, I wanted to try and help provide that for some other people. It was so life-changing for me. So many fundamental beliefs that I was really holding on to before that period, I later realized were the sources of my pain and my suffering. So within the compassion for other people and understanding that pain and suffering that so many go through, I was really inspired to help bring some tools, some awareness, some mentoring, whatever I could provide to other people. About a year and a half into that journey, I decided that I really wanted to focus on working with people who were struggling, who had struggled with addiction or were trying to find their way in addiction recovery. Because I had enough personal experience, struggles with alcohol, with substances, with different behaviors that I used as coping mechanisms to really have an understanding and compassion for people that were struggling from the same thing. One thing that saddens me the most is to see people that have battled against a substance or a behavior, decided that they need to make a change, they need to make a difference, started with the first couple steps toward their journey to recovery, maybe even found recovery, however they define it, whether that's sobriety, whether that's, whatever the pathway looks like for them. But what saddens me the most is to see people that have tremendous courage, have made tremendous effort, are still held back by the shame, the doubt, the limiting beliefs, a lot of the guilt, things that are consequences of their past with or without the addiction, the substance or behavior, or as a result of that substance or behavior, the pain and suffering that it created in their life. And I find that so many people are really held back by, or their potential is really held down by some of those consequences. So the work I've been doing for the last 2 years is really just focusing on helping people that have struggled with addiction in their past and helping them navigate the way to their highest potential so they can really experience that real full happiness, that fulfillment, that joy that we all desire, but so many people in recovery don't think it's possible for them. Well, I know that the opposite is true. So it's my efforts now to help people find that.
Great. And so I have two reasons to honestly and earnestly say thank you for your service, both to the country, but also to all these people who are struggling. For people who don't know, I spent the first part of my career in the addictions field, doing research, teaching about it, and actually running various units. So my background in this is, I have a background in this too. And I absolutely agree with you. The first concept for somebody who's got an addiction problem is, well, the first thing is just stop using, as if that in itself is the whole game. Now, yes, that's a part of it, but it's not all of it. And I think that's what you're working with,
Right.
because there's still some
there's not. Yeah, and I don't know of anybody, and maybe you'll agree with this, but I never met somebody who's in the depths of their struggle with addiction that wanted to be there, that wanted that to continue. If they knew how to stop it, if they knew how to move beyond it, if they knew how to survive without this substance or behavior, then they would do it.
Right.
It's like walking up on somebody who's got a wound in their stomach and they're bleeding out and saying, well, fix that, just stop bleeding, or don't be wounded. And it would sound ridiculous in that context. And it's hard to, I mean, addiction itself, as you understand, is such a complex issue. There's so many contributing factors to it. It shows up a little bit differently in everybody that struggle with it. So really having a grasp of it is very challenging. And because of that, I think because of either the misinformation, the misperception, the limited understanding of it, we come to, we as people kind of come to conclusions or make assumptions about what is going on, why it's going on, and what you can do to navigate beyond that. But the complexity of that only makes it, compounds the issue for so many people, not just individuals that struggle with it, but it compounds the issues and the situation for everybody who knows somebody who struggles with it.
Yeah. I have an interesting, a true story from my time in the addictions early on. A colleague and I were setting up a new program, and we had written, this was the days before email, we'd written to a number of our patients about, we'd like to talk to them about what we had in mind and get their feedback. And so one day, one guy came in, I remember him, he was dressed in a business suit, he was carrying his briefcase. He'd obviously been part of the program before, and that's why we contacted him. And, we talked, and my colleague who was senior to me talked about various things we were going to do. And he listened. And when we finished, he pulled a bottle, half bottle of vodka out of his case, opened it, glugged the whole thing down, and said, treat that. And as funny as that might seem, and as rude as it might seem, actually, I think he was saying something very important, which is, do you guys really understand what addiction is about? This was a long time ago. Do you guys really understand what it's about? I mean, that's what it's about. And it was very clever, a little bit of a shock to us, but I think it does speak to this issue of people who are struggling with addiction, what their perception is compared to what people helping them perception is. And I know your focus is on not just getting them to stop, but actually to find fulfillment and really to manage all the tangential things that very often come with
Yeah.
addiction.
Yeah, and there's many different pathways to help somebody find that recovery, and there's many different clinical pathways, and I focus specifically on the non-clinical realm, or so maybe I've found the tools to avoid this substance or behavior, but there's still this tremendous void inside of me, and I don't know what to do about it. So, and that's kind of back to the issue I was talking about. So many people find coping mechanisms, but then think that their life in recovery has to be this suffering against the cravings or suffering against that void or that pain. And that's not true. So that's really why, even once you've started that path to recovery, even once you've started your sobriety journey or whatever that looks like for the individual, there's still a lot more that can be done beyond maybe healing that big wound or learning how to avoid triggers and how to cope with the cravings. There's so much more that can be done, and that's not where the focus should be. We should, there's so much more to do beyond that.
Yeah, and to some extent that's true of medicine in general. Manage the symptom, and get that go away, and then that's fine. I personally believe
Sure.
that one thing we really need more in the health system are coaches like yourself who then can embrace in a way that a physician is certainly not trained to do or has the time to
Mm-hmm.
do, to
Right.
embrace this life enhancement part of it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the doctor stops the bleeding, that's it. But life
Yeah.
goes way beyond that, right?
Right. That's right. And nothing against the medical field. I mean, everybody has their role. Everybody has the area of focus. I think you're right, though. This is just one area that there's a lot of potential for growth, a lot of potential for more people to become involved, because surviving shouldn't be the end state. Survival shouldn't be the end state for any of us. We certainly have, there's certainly tools available, resources, mentorship, coaching, whatever it is that can help us really move beyond that and really live in a high level high level thriving or really flourishing in life.
And you talk about shame, guilt, humiliation, disgrace. Those are not uncommon factors or experiences that people who've got addiction issues have, right?
Sure. And people that, so back to the kind of the misinformation or misconception, or just there's so much that's not understood about addiction because of the shame, because of the social stigma. People are afraid to talk about it. People are afraid to ask questions about it, whether you're struggling with it or know somebody that's struggling with it. It's not something that's exciting to go learn about. And it's not something that, you have to have a sense of vulnerability to be even willing to ask the questions, or start the pursuit of greater knowledge about it. And unfortunately, that social stigma is something that fuels the shame in individuals that have struggled with it. And also the social stigma stops people from seeking help. In my community, and I'm sure this is similar in many communities, I would presume it's the same everywhere around our country, that the best addiction recovery resources or treatment resources are the best kept secret in the community, because these are things that people don't talk about. There's people that work at treatment facilities in this community and other communities that I've visited, and they don't know where there's other resources in the community, because and that's nothing against those individuals or against somebody who just doesn't know, but it just it speaks to how much effect that stigma has on it, that people are even afraid. If you or I went out and we enjoyed a great meal, let's pretend this isolation phase is over with and we're back to traveling to restaurants or going to the movie theater. If we went out and we saw a great movie, we went and had a great meal, we would go tell everybody about it. We'd post pictures of it on Facebook. The same could not be said for somebody who goes and finds a great group, a great tool, a great treatment center, a great resource that helps them with that internal struggle or with that struggle that they've had. We don't go share that with everybody. We don't go,
Right.
gloat about the resources that our family or our neighbors found. And because of that, there's so many more people that suffer in silence, and families that suffer in silence because of that. And that's not just in the active addiction realm, but that's even, for the rest of somebody's life, for the number of years beyond that active addiction that somebody is struggling and not living into their true potential. It's not just affecting their life, it's affecting their family's lives, their neighbors' lives, their friends' lives, their coworkers' lives, and the community as a whole, because that's that much more love and passion and creativity and inspiration that can't be shared with the community, with all of society.
Yeah, it does. And the shame, you're quite right. The shame about it is we don't talk about it, and you see
Yeah.
posts and, things are disguised, friends of Bill W. Right?
Right.
Or
Sure.
we go to a meeting, people will know where it's at. You won't say exactly where it is. So it's sort of cloak
Yeah.
and dagger, secretive stuff, which
Yeah.
doesn't then get the exposure that it needs so that people can
That's right.
realize there's help out for them. Yep.
That's right.
How have
So,
you?
and I
I'm
don't think
sorry.
that there's, yeah, please go ahead.
No, go. Please.
One of the things I think that affects this conversation around addiction, is the way that we look at it. It's very easy to make a list of things that are wrong with addiction, make a list of effects that come from somebody who struggled with it, make a list of all the harm that it can create in somebody's life, all the consequences, all the risks. It's very easy to look at everything on the negative side. And when we do that, it's hard to understand why somebody would go back to that. Why would something, if you can move away from something for an hour, for 24 hours, for a year, why would somebody ever go back to that when it's so obvious, this long list of consequences and costs, and risks that are associated with it? Well, I think one thing that helps that understanding is to have a more full conversation about addiction. And by doing so, we can look at the good of addiction. One thing, if I'm in a room with people talking about it, one of the questions I always ask is, what's good about addiction? Because this isn't even something that, it just sounds weird to even say it. It sounds weird to hear it because this is something that we so rarely talk about. So it's so hard to understand the allure, the draw to it, if we don't understand what good can come from it.
Mhm.
Nothing is good or bad completely or absolutely. It's just how we relate it to something else, or the aspects that we look at it that helps us determine whether it's good or bad. But if we can start to list and look at and identify some of the good that comes from addiction, then we can begin to understand it. Addiction for many people, it's a coping mechanism. Addiction is it's a maladaptive coping mechanism that helps them deal with something they don't know how to deal with. It's a way to avoid something that they don't want to deal with. So what it provides for somebody is freedom from boredom, freedom from pain, freedom from isolation, a numbing of a pain, a feeling of being alive when they've never felt alive before. There's all these things that come from this substance or this behavior. And when we can start to understand that, and especially when I'm working with people in recovery, it's if we can understand what it was that drew us there, then that can help us understand where we might need to do work, or where there might be some voids to fill in, or where we might have something that we need to invite more of into our life, more passions, more joy into our life to help deal with those things. And it also helps my clients and helps people that are in recovery reduce a little bit of that sense of shame or that guilt for exposing themselves to whatever that thing was. When you realize that everything that you've done in your life, and this is true for all of us, everything that you've done was the best that you could personally do at the time with the limited resources, awareness, skills, energy, whatever it is that you had at that time, whatever the decision was that you made. So if you reached for something for whatever positive benefit you might get from it, whether it was an avoidance of pain or a seeking of pleasure, it's because you were doing the best that you could at the time. And when we can start to look at some of the positives that come from it, again, it helps reduce that guilt, reduce that shame, because these are enormous emotional barriers to recovery and enormous emotional barriers that prevent people from living really into their potential for a thriving life in their recovery.
Yeah, and I suspect when you present this view to your clients, it's a bit of a shock to them. They're not expecting it, right? I mean, they've not
Yeah,
heard this
that's
before,
right.
right?
And from it, a little bit of compassion. I mean, even just a little seed of compassion, if that's all, then at least you can have some compassion for yourselves. And you've worked with people that have been in active addiction. I've worked with people that are in recovery. And when you hear some of the stories about the life experiences that they've gone through, it's hard not to come to the conclusion of course you would use drugs. Of course you would use this behavior. Of course you would have this coping or this numbing mechanism. It's like, look at all the emotional pain, even if you don't recognize it at the time because it's been bottled up for so long or you become numb to it. It's like, of course, this is the path. Like, it's almost like, how could you not go? The amount of pain that you must have been dealing with, or the amount of struggle, the internal struggle, of course you would have gone to that place. And that doesn't mean that you need to keep going back to that place. It's just looking at the resources, the awareness, the skills, the talents, the support that you had at the time. That's the best that you could do. But now we can invite some more things into your life to help you get to a better place, so you don't need that. But no reason to continue to beat yourself up every single day for decisions that you made in your past. There's nothing you can do about those past decisions. And if you continue to allow them to fuel negative emotions, then they're going to continue to be stuck in our thoughts and in our emotions. But if we can release some of that pain, that shame, that guilt, then we can allow those things to move beyond, and then we can leverage the positive sides of it. That's not just negative consequences of our past actions and behaviors. There's also good things that came from it. Greater awareness, greater compassion, greater sense of self, greater knowing of self. It might have drawn our attention to where there is some emotional pain that we need to go deal with. But all these things are positives that can come from the past. And we look at those positives, and that empowers us to move forward in that positive direction and not continue to be stuck at that limited place, that limited amount of potential.
Absolutely. And, shame and humiliation and disgrace can be very, very damaging if they're not effectively addressed and dealt with and put in the right
Yeah.
perspective, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And you've talked about the brain. I mean, you've written about the brain a lot and the way that it functions a lot, and every time one of those negative emotions comes up, but it creates a stress response in our body. And the minute that we get into that stress response, all of our higher level cognitive functioning kicks offline, because now we're just trying to survive in the moment. Well, you need your ability to rationalize. You need your ability to your creative senses, your creative ability, your ability to navigate through things, your analytical mind. These are the things that we need to navigate our life. And if we're constantly in that stress state, either because of outside factors or internal thoughts and self-talk, the shame, the guilt, and all these things that kick us into that stress response, of course, we won't be able to navigate through that from that place. And because of that, finding those seeds of positive things that came from our past can help stimulate that gratitude, release some of that, or reduce some of that effects of the cortisol and the adrenaline in our bodies, so that we can get back into a place and use our full cognitive function, our full creativity, and the full essence of ourselves to navigate forward.
Yeah. And would you say that's probably what we've been talking about so far is sort of the biggest misconception shared by people, including addicts themselves or people who've been addicted themselves, is this whole notion that it's totally negative, I screwed up, I'm a failure, all those other things. And the challenge to move beyond that that's been the challenge, and that may be the biggest misconception people have about it.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, it's not, it doesn't just have to be negative. Now, I'm certainly not advocating for anybody to go out and mess around with addictive substance or behaviors in hopes that they become slaves
Right.
to them.
Mm.
But of course, anybody who has had that struggle in the past, let's find the positive from that. And here's the main, and philosophically, this is the reason why. If you all you do is focus on the cost, and all you do is focus on whether it's internally, you're looking at all your personal defects, all the mistakes that you've made, all the times that you made the wrong decision, all the times that that somebody relied on you and you let them down. Well, if you can analyze, if you can make a long list of that, what are you going to do with that? I mean, the best that you can do is try to make amends for, remove some of those things from your life, but what can you do with that to move forward? These are all negative things. These are all deficits. These are all there's some four-letter words that come to mind that help to describe some of this. But how can you build something better by just looking at the negatives? If we can find and identify some of those positives, these are things that we can leverage to move forward. A lot of the work that I do, it's fun. At the fundamental level, the foundational level is identifying strengths. Because from the positive psychology perspective or the science of human flourishing, let's create a strengths focused pathway forward. Because if we can identify our strengths, then we know what we can leverage, we know what we can use to move forward. And no matter how many mistakes, how many upsets, how many times you've fallen down or screwed things up in your life, there's also a lot of times that you got things right. There's a lot of wins that you've had. There's a lot of times somebody did count on you and you got it right. There's a lot of times you did face an obstacle and you were successful at navigating it. If we can remind ourselves of these things, then we can take hints and clues from that and remember our strengths, because these are things that we can begin to build a foundation for to move forward. The whole model of positive psychology or human flourishing is moving from neutral point into higher level functioning or higher level wellness. Because if all you do is try to identify the negative things and remove negative things from your life, the best place that you can get to is that neutral point. Or that survival place. But if you can leverage the strengths, if you can leverage the wins that you've had in the past, now this helps you move into that higher level wellness or higher level functioning.
Yeah, and the other thing about just focusing on negatives, if you think about the availability bias, if that's all you're thinking about, you're just going to get more and more negative. That's all that's going on in your
Sure.
head, and that's not
That's right.
helpful. You need to have a balance
Right.
there, and that's one of the problems, I think, has been one of the problems of sort of more conventional addiction treatment, is getting
Yeah.
people to talk about all their failures and what have you. But I agree with you. Yeah, there's some of that, but you got to balance that. That's not what your
Sure.
life has been about. And
And great way to take an inventory of it, recognize the mistakes that you've made so that you're not in denial and that you're not, and people don't think that you're trying to avoid the consequences of some of your actions. Certainly recognize it, but yes, you've got to move beyond it. Because if you spend all of your time, if all you do is go to meetings and you hear about people's failures, if all you do is talk about your failures and talk about the bad things that you've done, well, yes, it does. It's affecting your biases, because now you got confirmation bias, because you've got this assumption that you're just a piece of crap and you screw everything up, and then you're going to go find evidence to that. And if we can just hold some space, if we can just hit the pause button, if we can just give ourselves a moment to remember one win that we've had or one strength that we've had, and we also offer ourselves that opportunity to go find other evidence that supports that, and then that will expand from there. And as it expands, then I think the limit of somebody's potential, or what they actualize in their life, is a function of their self-efficacy and their self-esteem, or their self-efficacy and their positive affect. So their ability to deal with negative emotions and not get stuck there, but also their self-esteem is a tremendous part of that. The better that you feel about yourself, or the better you feel about your chance of successfully navigating obstacles in the future, then the more willing you are to take risks, the more willing you are to put yourself out there, the more willing you are to pursue opportunities, and the less negative things you'll deal with or allow into your life, because you feel better about yourself. So therefore you won't deal with some of the things, you won't put up with some of those things that might continue to wear you down or you get you into that bad place.
yeah, I was reading a paper recently, and it talked about self-relationship rather than self-esteem. I think that's a good term. Your relationship with yourself.
Mm,
What is it? And that's what
yeah,
you're talking about, that relationship with self. And again,
absolutely.
there's a
Yeah,
danger when you label people as a group, that all the characteristics of that group, all the negative things, people and understand about addiction come up, and you lose a sense of perspective. Um, and,
Sure.
and I think that is very critical, and the work that you're doing is important. So tell us actually how that manifests, this philosophy manifests in helping people.
Yeah. So one thing I try to point out, there's an estimated 26, 28 million people right now in active addiction in America alone. So about 1 in 10 people are struggling with either some substance or some behavior. The thing to realize about that or recognize is that's 28 million different pathways that got somebody to where they are. 28 million different pathways of circumstances, of conditioning, whether it's biological, whatever it is, it's 28 million different combinations that got somebody to where they are. To think that there's only one pathway out of addiction or one pathway beyond that, or 10 or even 100 pathways beyond that, is, I think, very naive and very short-sighted. The reality is every person is going to require a different combination of tools, of resources, of inspiration, of support to help them successfully navigate from that place into their best version of recovery, or of that life past past their previous struggles. And I say that and I remind people of that for a couple of reasons. One, let's look at the pre-addiction side. There's so many different combinations of of issues that can move somebody in that direction toward the reliance on a substance or behavior. That said, because nobody's destined to struggle with addiction. There's nobody that's labeled from the time that they're born that they have to struggle with addiction at some point in their life. There's certainly some contributing factors, and some people are more predisposed to struggling with those behaviors, but nobody is guaranteed to do it. So just because you grow up in a family of people that have all struggled with addiction, or just because you've experienced a horrendous trauma in your life, doesn't mean that you have to struggle with addictive substances or behaviors. The flip side of that coin is you're absolutely not exempt. Nobody is exempt from it. If you have a heartbeat, if you're a human being, then you have the ability to be overcome or become enslaved to a substance or behavior in your life if you have the right combination of things that happen in your life. So let's not be complacent. Let's not think that anybody is better than anybody else that has struggled that way. And let's not think that we are destined to go down that pathway just because certain things have happened in our life. On the other side of this, now we're looking at the recovery side of this. There's 30 million different pathways that got somebody in, 28 some million different pathways. For every individual that struggled, they've had their own path into addiction. Every person that's going to find their best version of recovery is going to have their own unique pathway out of it. So if you're going to one program, if you're looking at one resource, if you're exposing yourself to one thing, whatever that recovery journey should look like for you, and you're not experiencing the success that you want, or your friends are having much greater time overcoming their past and really living into their potential than you are, that doesn't mean that there's necessarily something wrong with you. I would suspect that there's nothing wrong with you, except for the fact that you need to find your right pathway. So if one pathway is not working for you, it's not because you're such a defect that you'll never be able to get beyond those struggles. It just means that you need to find the right way for you to move beyond it. Of course, there's a warning to that. You've got to be honest with yourself. You can't just be in denial and say, this didn't work for me, I'm never going to be able to move beyond it. If you truly have that desire, and you're not just living in denial and not willing to do the work, of course, it's going to take some hard work to move beyond it. But if you're willing to do that work, and you are open to the possibility that you could experience a better life or a positive life in recovery, and there is out there somewhere, there is a right combination to help you make that happen, to help you move in that direction. And that's where I focus with the work. The work that I do is I've been exposed to a lot of things that have helped me in my life, and I've been witness to a lot of things that have helped other people in their life, from my training as a human potential trainer to studying the science of human flourishing, and even some things that I've written about in my books, the charity, the gifts of giving, as you're very familiar with, and the Spheres approach to happiness. When I'm working with a client individually, I recognize that I'm not the expert of their life journey, and I'm not the expert of their recovery journey. What I am the expert is of providing and presenting different tools, different resources, different ways to navigate to that place that they want to get to. But it's always the client that is the expert, because they know what their pains are, they know what they need, they know what they want their life to look like. And then as a recovery mindset coach, I just work on helping them be exposed to those things, understand these tools, understand the resources, and navigate that path. I take a lot of a lot of inspiration from the science of human flourishing and the model that looks at different areas of somebody's life, from positivity to engagement to meaning, achievement, and relationships, and help identify things that can help my clients move forward in each one of those ways. Because what I've recognized is you can be extremely successful in 5, 6 different areas of your life, depending on how many areas you're looking at. But if you're deficit or deficient in one area, that can become your critical vulnerability that knocks you back down to that bad place that you want to get to. So it's not good enough to have a great relationship, be doing well financially, if you don't have a strong sense of meaning and purpose in your life. And likewise, it's if you have a strong sense of meaning and purpose in your life, you feel really engaged, you have good supportive relationships, but you have no natural emotional resilience to dealing with negativity that shows up in your life, then that can be a critical vulnerability to take you right back to where you're trying to get out of. So for everybody's journey in recovery, though, everybody's individual journey is going to look unique. If it's not holistic, if it's not comprehensive, and it doesn't look at every area, every facet of somebody's life and make sure that there's no critical vulnerabilities or major holes there that can knock them back, then the chance that it's going to be effective is much lower. If you can find those resources and you can move forward in all of those areas, and that's really what allows somebody to live their best version of recovery.
Yeah. And as you were talking about positivity, that somebody's name jumped to my mind, Marty Seligman, who's a
Yes.
psychologist that I actually happened to know briefly when I was in training, because he came to the Institute of Psychiatry on a sabbatical. And of course, that led me to thinking about his initial work in learned helplessness. And in a way, what we were talking about earlier about the sort of more conventional view is learned helplessness, right? There's nothing I can do about it. I'm an addict. I'm a loser, blah, blah, blah. And his work, and you don't really need to have scientific research to prove it, shows that that's a very destructive and damaging perception. And that conversely, as you got into positivity and positive psychology, the reverse is true.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's what excites me so much, and that's what provides so much potential, is that yes, everything, as I said, the best that we could do at the time was whatever the action was that we committed. But that doesn't mean that we can't grow beyond that. I mean, what we've learned recently with neuro pathways and everything we've been learning about the brain, it's incredible to understand that and to really see, as some of the latest studies have been showing, like what is possible for somebody. So if you feel like you're not living your full expression of happiness and fulfillment and joy, there's a way to move beyond that. And I'm certainly hold that. And if my clients don't believe that in the beginning, well, then I hold that space and I hold that belief and I help them, set that intention until they can believe that and really truly understand that for themselves.
Yeah. And I think also here we're looking at the benefit or the advantages of coaching over therapy. Therapy, well, now somebody's labeled as a patient, a very medical model, and the therapist has got all the answers. And coaching is quite different. Coaching is working as a team, and the patient does all the work, and the coach is guiding them in that, right? Across a whole frame, a broad array of life circumstances, not just symptomatic.
Certainly. Yeah. And that's it also, with the client being the professional, there's no need for labels. There's no need for the shame. We can look at everything that shows up in one's life and see why it showed up. How did this serve me at the time? Is this still serving me now? How can I move beyond it if it's no longer serving me? And where are there some things where I might be deficit or might be deficient in some tools or resources or inspiration or support? And how can we invite that into your life? And again, these are just, as a coach, just kind of guiding questions to provide the space for and the support for the client to really come up with those solutions. Because back to the premise that every individual is going to have their own unique pathway to recovery. I certainly couldn't be, nor could anybody be, the expert on 30 million different pathways. Right. But we don't need to be, because the client is.
And of course, as you're talking, the things that you are doing with addicts could be just as equally applied to everyone else who has never had a quotation mark addiction problem, because you're trying to help them find their fullest potential, meaning and purpose, which you hope everyone is trying to do, but we know is not the case. People aren't
Absolutely.
aware of it, right? So
Yeah.
again, uh, although you are working with addicts and there's some specifics that go with that, the fundamental philosophy here is applicable to anyone, right?
Absolutely. And really, in the fact that I work with people in addiction recovery, it's a contextual thing, and it helps contextualize the conversations that we have and an understanding of some unique things that they might have experienced in their past. But you're absolutely right. These are human issues, and that's why I say, if you're a human and you have a heartbeat, then you're susceptible to experiencing these human things that are pain, suffering, lack of fulfillment, lack of joy, guilt, self doubt. And because of that, you can use the same things to move beyond that. And there's a dozen or so very common things that we think of if somebody struggles with it, then they're an addict, and that's an addiction. But there's so many things in our lives, and I would suggest that every human being has struggled with something at some point that was an external stimulus that helped deal with an internal problem, whether it was one of these things that we recognize as addiction, or whether it's not, or whether it's a more socially acceptable addiction like being a workaholic, or
Right,
being
right.
enthusiast in anything really that you're using. Now, if you're using it and it's pure joy and it's pure passion and every element of it adds to your life, well, that can be great. But if you're using it as a means to escape or avoid or deny something else that's going on in your life, or just to fill a void because there's something with your self relationship that suggests that you're not a perfect being just as you are, the way that you're showing up, if there's any element of that you're trying to escape some kind of discomfort, then there's it's symptomatic. It's the same symptoms that anybody that struggled with an addiction. I count myself lucky that I didn't go further down these paths of these things that I was exposed to and these things that I used in my life. But I certainly don't think that makes me better or worse than somebody else. I count myself blessed, and I'm grateful for the experiences that I've had, and grateful for my ability to navigate that and find the resources and the mentorship I needed at the time.
Yeah, and I think that experience, just as you say, I think adds to your understanding and knowledge of it. And I think that's
Yeah.
important, but I think we should understand, those of us who have, or those who don't really know anything about addiction, there's not a lot of difference between people's coping mechanisms, that have not involved addictive substances, and those that have. People have
Yeah.
often, when I was doing this, people often said, "Well, have you ever been addicted to, anything?" And I said, "Well, not a substance, no." No, but have I been in situations where I made poor choices? Absolutely. Do I regret them? Absolutely. Have I been misled by other people? Yeah, absolutely. So I may not have had
Yeah.
a substance addiction, but I've had a lot of the experiences that really go with being addicted. We can't
Right.
separate that off as, oh, that's a different part of life. It isn't.
Sure. Sure. And that's one thing that really drew my passion into working with this population, because I recognize all the things that really fuel that shame and the guilt and everything, all these barriers that help somebody find their best version in recovery. And a lot of that comes from the misperceptions, the misunderstanding, and really the hypocrisy of people that haven't struggled with addiction, that don't understand it, don't want to understand it. Hey, how dare you judge a person who struggled with alcohol or struggled with opioids or struggled with sex or gambling, whatever that addiction was? How dare you judge them when you yourself are $60,000 in credit card debt, 50 pounds overweight, you neglect all of your relationships because you can't get away from the social media on your phone, or you work 100 hours a week and it's affecting all these other, your health, your relationships. Like, how dare you judge somebody else because of the way that their addiction manifests, and because society says it's okay to shame and judge them, when you yourself, let's come back to, let's look in the mirror and let's not cast that first stone. And it, though I understand that that's not a positively inspired passion for this to help, shut people up that are judging and shaming people that they don't understand, it certainly is something that's in my mind, and certainly something that fuels me. and fuels my advocacy of just helping people understand more about addiction. Not because I want to shame anybody else out of their behaviors, but hell, we're all humans here. We're all doing the best that we can. We're all trying to navigate the best that we can. And if you haven't struggled with opioids, or you haven't struggled with alcohol, or you haven't struggled with gambling, just count yourself blessed. Don't use that as a measuring stick to measure yourself better than somebody else.
Yes, and having known you a little bit and read your work and know how you operate, I'm very impressed the fact that you absolutely do base your wisdom, and I'm calling it wisdom, on virtue and value and moral virtue. In your book, Charity, the Gift of Giving, you make the point about charity, about doing good things, and when you do good things, that benefits you as well as other people too.
Yeah, certainly.
And in my book, I think therefore I'm wrong, I talk about wisdom coming from virtue and values, which every wise person of the last 2,000, 3,000 years has said. But
Hmm.
I think that gets lost a bit today, where everyone seems to
Yeah,
have their own agenda and all of that. But but for me, you seem to be based on that. And just hearing you say, let's not get into judgment, I think is very important. People, we do that all the time, even if you don't realize you're doing it. And I think that's great
right.
credit to you, that's really where your base is. I think it's about compassion, right?
Yeah,
Forgiveness, gratitude, all of those things, which I believe is the absolutely right basis for anyone, addict or not addict or
certainly.
whatever label you have. So I really appreciate that about what you do. And I know, therefore, that it is of incredible value. It has the right basis and is incredibly meaningful to you and the people that you interact
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate everything that you're doing. And I think we're both on a similar mission in different ways. And you're in your inspiration to bring that virtue and that value back into. We look at everything that's going on in the world around us, and
with.
the symptoms of what we see, and it's certain that we're deviating from that. It doesn't mean that we can't get back to that. It doesn't mean that it certainly means every step that we take in that better direction is a step that's going to have rippling effects for so many people. So I certainly appreciate your efforts to share that message and also help people navigate back to that right path.
Well, thank you. But it's so meaningful, as you know, when you get involved in that and see what it does and feel what it does. There really is
Yeah,
no other path.
yeah.
Um, tell the listeners where they can find more about what you do and how to reach you and so forth.
Absolutely. So I've got one website. It's called thrivingin.yourrecovery.com. And there's some information there about some of the work that I do, the programs that I provide. I've created an online program, which is brilliant because it allows people to access some tools and resources on their own time from the comfort of their own home without anybody else knowing about it. So if they're, no matter where they are in their recovery journey, or whether they think that they might be struggling with something and wish that they just kind of had the tools to live a little bit more into their potential and get away from that, this is an incredible resource. I also do some one-on-one coaching with individuals using this online course as the platform, but helping them navigate their individual path. You can find out about all that at thrivinginyourrecovery.com. And then I've also got I recently released a series of videos on YouTube. So you can go to my YouTube channel, and I think you'll put a link in the show notes, but it's Garret B. Biss. Garrett's with one T. B. Biss is the channel name. But I recently did a series of Stoic recovery wisdom, and I'm going to continue to release some more until there's at least 40 of them. But just taking some passages from ancient Stoics and reading the wisdom that they shared thousands of years ago, and sharing about how that resonates with, or how that's valuable today for somebody in their recovery journey. And really, all my work, like everything that I do, is trying to help people experience what I refer to as a life unchained. It's a life unchained from the shame, the guilt, the self-doubt, and everything that can be holding somebody back from their past, really holding them back from living into their true potential for happiness and joy. And I also have a Facebook group to that name, where it's a group of people that come together with a shared understanding and help provide that inspiration, that support, and those resources to help somebody live into that best version of their life and recovery. And that's valuable for somebody who is struggled with it themselves, or knows somebody that struggles with it and is just looking for some resource to help them understand that. And you can find that at Facebook, and then just search for a Life Unchained, and the group will come up. We'd love to have you or anybody be a part of that.
Excellent, excellent. The work you're doing is awesome. I really believe that you're helping many people and also helping, I hope, to change the perception of addiction and what it really is, because I think that is sometimes a liability in this
Yeah,
business. So it's great to see that people like you are challenging that in really bringing something more to
yeah.
bear on the problem. Any last words, Garret, before we sign off?
Just thank you very much for not only catching up with me and having this conversation, but allowing me to share this message with your audience, your listeners, and just have this opportunity to talk about something I'm so passionate about. If there's just one person out there that heard something that helps them out, then it was certainly worth my time and investment.
Absolutely. Well, it's great having you on the show. Hopefully, we'll get you back some other time and continue the conversation. But for now, thank you for all your work you're doing, and I appreciate you being on the show. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.